Daniel 9:27 is about the Antichrist, not Jesus Christ. And if you watch this whole video, I promise to prove it to you. So the first step is to start at verse 26, and you will see that this verse transitions from talking about Jesus to talking about the Antichrist. It says, after the 62 sevens, the anointed one, which is Jesus, will be put to death and will have nothing. Now the verse introduces a new character, the Antichrist. It says, the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. Now we get to verse 27. He, which is the ruler who will come, not the anointed one, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So this character is not Jesus. Jesus does not set up an abomination of desolation, and Jesus is not going to have a decreed end that's poured out on him. That is the Antichrist. One translation that makes this tricky verse clear is the NLT. So we'll read it in that translation, and I'll read it as one with no breaks. So starting at verse 26, it says, after this period of 62 sets of 7, the anointed one will be killed, appearing to have accomplished nothing. And a ruler will arise whose armies will destroy the city and the temple. The end will come with a flood and a war, and its miseries are decreed from that time to the very end. The ruler will make a treaty with the people for a period of 1 set of 7, but after half this time, he will put an end to the sacrifices and offerings, and as a climax to all his terrible deeds, he will set up a sacrilegious object that causes desecration, until the fate decreed for this defiler is finally poured out on him. So again, we're seeing two separate characters starting in verse 26. We have the anointed one, which is Jesus. Then it switches to a future ruler, the Antichrist, who will do terrible deeds, including destroying the temple, setting up the abomination of desolation, and stopping the sacrifices. And here's the important part. You have to look at the rest of Daniel to make sense of this, because this theme of an evil, wicked ruler stopping the sacrifices and setting up an abomination is repeated throughout the book of Daniel. And in these other contexts, it's very clear that this person is not Jesus. So I'll read you a couple of those verses. We have Daniel 11:31, speaking of the wicked king. It says, his armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. Another thing to note in all these contexts is stopping the daily sacrifice is actually considered an insult to God, because as we find out later in scripture, the Antichrist is sitting in the temple and declaring that he's God. So he's essentially saying by stopping the sacrifices that there's no other God but himself, and he's going to demand all the worship. And just for reference, the abomination that causes desolation is likely some kind of idol that the Antichrist will set up in the temple of himself. And then when you get to Revelation 13, you see the image of the beast, and many make a tie between those two things. The Antichrist could actually set up the image of the beast in the temple that was supposed to be dedicated to God by Israel. Now let's look at some more references to show this tie between stopping the sacrifices, setting up the abomination of desolation, and it being a bad thing. So in Daniel 8, it's speaking about the little horn, which is another name for the Antichrist, and it says, it grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown down to the ground. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Have a great day.